The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the narrow bridge. Brianna, a pregnant woman, sat stranded in her car, the engine dead. She had been on her way home from a family gathering when her old sedan sputtered and died. Now, she was stuck on the bridge, blocking one lane of the two-lane road. Her phone had no signal, and the road behind her was empty, for now. The distant roar of engines broke the silence. Brianna turned to see a group of bikers approaching. Her heart raced as they grew closer, their leather-clad figures intimidating. She waved her arm out the window, trying to signal them, but fear gripped her. Would they stop? And if they did, what would they do? The lead biker halted a few feet from her car. He removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face with a graying beard. His eyes met hers, sharp but not unkind. "Car trouble?" he asked. Brianna nodded, her voice trembling. "It just died. I can't get it to start." The biker glanced at her belly, his expression softening. "We'll help you," he said simply. The bikers worked quickly, one of them pulling out a toolkit while another guided Brianna to safety. Within minutes, the car roared back to life. Brianna thanked them, her gratitude overwhelming. The lead, biker, Jack, handed her a mechanic's card. "Take care of yourself," he said. As the bikers rode off, Brianna watched them go, her fear replaced by gratitude. She had expected the worst, but found kindness instead. The world, she realized, wasn't as scary as it seemed, not when there were people like Jack and his crew, ready to help when you needed it most. One of the bikers dismounted, his tall frame towering over the scene. His boots clinked against the pavement as he walked toward Brianna's car. She sat, frozen, her fingers hovering over the door lock button. Her pulse quickened, and every worst-case scenario flashed through her mind. But something about the man's body language, calm, deliberate, suggested this might not go the way she feared. Brianna's grip tightened on the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. The other bikers remained on their bikes, their engines, idling, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. To her, it looked like a scene straight out of a movie, a moment teetering on the edge of chaos. The man stopped a few feet from her window and raised a gloved hand. "Hey!" he called out, his voice muffled but steady. "You okay in there?" Brianna hesitated, her instincts torn between fear and a faint glimmer of hope. Her window was cracked just enough for her to speak. "My car. It's stalled. I can't get it to start." The man nodded, his movements measured. He stepped closer, careful to avoid any sudden gestures. His leather jacket bore patches and insignia she couldn't decipher, and his boots looked worn from miles on the road. "Pop the hood," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Let me take a look." Brianna's heart raced. Was this a ploy? She glanced past him at the group of bikers behind him, now dismounted and watching intently. It felt like the whole world had narrowed to this bridge, her car, and these men. "I don't know," she replied, her voice shaky. The man took a step back, raising both hands slightly, palms outward. "Look," he said, "we're not here to hurt you. But you're blocking the road, and this bridge isn't exactly the safest place to be stuck. Let us help." His words hung in the air, their weight sinking in. Brianna studied his face, or what she could see of it through his helmet's open visor. His eyes were sharp and steady, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of trust. With a deep breath, she reached for the lever under the dashboard and popped the hood. The man nodded, a small gesture of reassurance, and walked to the front of the car. The other bikers remained where they were, their presence looming but not threatening. As the man tinkered with the engine, Brianna watched him closely. His movements were confident, his hands steady. She noticed the way he worked. Efficient, focused, and without unnecessary noise. It was clear he knew what he was doing. A few minutes later, he stepped back and closed the hood. "Try it now," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Brianna turned the key and the engine roared to life. Relief washed over her, and she looked at the man with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling but sincere. The man nodded. Again, his expression unreadable behind the helmet. "Take care," he said simply. Then he turned and walked back to his bike, his boots clinking against the pavement once more. The bikers mounted their motorcycles, the engines revving in unison. As they rode off, Brianna sat there, her hands still gripping the wheel. The fear she had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of awe. These strangers, these bikers, had helped her without asking for anything in return. She drove off the bridge, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. The world, she realized, was full of surprises, and sometimes those surprises came in the form of leather-clad bikers on a lonely bridge. The biker's eyes held no trace of malice. Against her better judgment, Brianna reached for the latch and popped the hood. The man gave a short nod, then turned to signal one of the others. 2 more bikers approached, their movements cautious and deliberate. Brianna watched as they lifted the hood, their voices low as they examined the engine. She still felt trapped, the tension in her chest refusing to ease. Every second felt like a gamble. "What's your name?" the first man asked, glancing back at her. "Brianna," she answered, after a pause, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Brianna," he said, turning back to the car. "Looks like your battery might be shot. We'll see if we can jump it, but we'll need to move you to the side first." Her eyes darted to the edge of the bridge, the drop into the shallow creek below, enough to make her stomach turn. She hadn't even considered how close she was to the edge until now. "You think it'll work?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. One of the bikers shrugged. "Worth a shot," he said simply. Another fetched a set of jumper cables from his saddlebag, the tools clinking faintly in the quiet. But as they worked, another sound broke through the steady hum of the engines. The distant whine of a car horn. Brianna turned to see a pickup truck cresting the hill behind them. The driver leaned out his window, yelling something she couldn't make out. He wasn't slowing down. The bikers noticed too. One of them quickly stepped into the road, waving the truck to stop. "Hold up, man. There's a breakdown here." But the driver didn't seem to care. He slammed on the brakes just feet from the biker, throwing the truck into park and jumping out. A burly man with a red baseball cap stormed toward the group, his voice booming. "What the hell's going on here?" he shouted, his eyes darting, to Brianna, then to the bikers. Suspicion and hostility were written all over his face. "You messing with her?" Brianna felt her throat tighten. The tension, already thick, now felt unbearable. But before anyone could speak, the lead biker stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "We're helping her. You got a problem with that?" The man in the red cap squared his shoulders, his jaw tight as he glanced between the bikers and Brianna. "Helping her, huh?" he said, his tone laced with doubt. "A bunch of you dressed like that? Forgive me if I don't buy it." The lead biker tilted his head, his body language steady and unshaken. "You see something wrong with helping a woman stuck on a bridge?" He shot back, his voice calm but firm. The man in the red cap hesitated, his eyes narrowing. Brianna could see the gears turning in his head, the conflict between his assumptions and the scene before him. The bikers stood their ground, their presence unwavering. Finally, the man in the red cap took a step back, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. All right, he muttered. "Just making sure she's okay." The lead biker nodded, his expression unreadable. "She's fine. We've got it handled." As the man in the red cap retreated to his truck, Brianna felt a wave of relief wash over her. The bikers returned to their task, their focus unbroken. Within minutes, they had her car running again. "Thank you," Brianna said, her voice trembling but sincere. The lead biker gave her a small nod, his eyes softening for, "Just a moment. Take care," he said simply. Then he and the others mounted their bikes and rode off, leaving Brianna alone on the bridge once more. She sat there for a moment, her hands gripping the wheel, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. The world, she realized, was full of surprises. And sometimes, those surprises came in the form of leather-clad bikers on a lonely bridge. The other bikers stood silently behind the lead rider, their presence alone adding to the tension. Brianna wanted to speak, to clarify what was happening, but fear held her back. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel as she watched the exchange, the uneasiness in her chest growing with every second. The man from the truck took another step, forward, but one of the bikers, shorter but stockier, intervened, stepping into his path. "Listen, man," he said, his voice firm but calm. "We don't want any trouble. She's stranded, and we're trying to get her out of here safely." "Yeah? And what are you going to do, tough guy, if I don't believe you?" The truck driver spat, his voice rising. He glanced toward Brianna. "Hey, you all right? You want me to call someone?" Brianna hesitated, her voice caught in her throat. The lead biker turned to her, his eyes softening as if to say, "It's your call." Finally, she found the courage to speak. They're helping me. My car won't start," she said, her voice trembling but audible. For a moment, the truck driver seemed to falter, his bravado wavering. But before he could say more, the lead biker stepped closer, gesturing to the truck. "Look, man, you want to help? Fine. Park your truck, grab a flashlight, and make yourself useful. Otherwise, get out of the way." The boldness in his tone silenced everyone. The truck driver looked at him, then at the others, as if weighing his options. With a grumble, he threw his hands up. "Fine. Do what you want," he said, retreating to his vehicle. The tension eased slightly as the bikers got back to work. They hooked up the jumper cables and instructed Brianna to turn the key. The engine sputtered, groaned, and finally roared back to life. Relief flooded her body, her shoulders sagging as the fear began to dissipate. The lead biker closed the hood, giving it a solid pat before turning back to her window. "You're good to go, but take it easy. That battery might not last long." Brianna blinked, still processing everything. I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't worry about it," he replied. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "We're not all bad, you know. Don't believe everything you see on TV." Before she could respond, he turned back to his group, motioning for them to mount their bikes. The roar of their engines filled the air again as they prepared to leave. Brianna watched them go, her hands still gripping the wheel, her mind racing. But soon, bikers rode off into the distance, their silhouettes fading against the setting sun. Brianna sat there for a moment, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. She had expected the worst, but instead she had found kindness in the most unlikely of places. As she drove off the bridge, the tension in her chest finally eased. The world, she realized, wasn't as black and white as she had once thought. Sometimes, help came from the most unexpected corners. Leather-clad bikers on a lonely bridge, proving that appearances could be deceiving. But then, something unexpected happened. The truck driver, now leaning against his vehicle, called out, "Hey, sorry for jumping to conclusions. Guess I was wrong." The lead biker glanced at him, nodded, and climbed onto his motorcycle without a word. The group rolled out in unison, the sound of their engines fading into the distance. Brianna sat in her car, stunned. The moment had been so charged with fear and suspicion, yet it had ended with unexpected kindness. She looked out at the road ahead, her heart still racing, but this time for a different reason. The day wasn't over yet, and what she would soon discover would make her reflect on this encounter even more deeply. Brianna cautiously pulled her car off the bridge and onto the gravel shoulder just beyond it. Her hands still trembled slightly. She needed a moment to breathe, to process what had just happened. She replayed the scene in her mind, the biker's calm demeanor, the truck driver's hostility, and the way everything had shifted in a matter of minutes. It was surreal, like stepping out of one story and into another. She sat there for a moment, watching the tail lights of the truck disappear down the road. Then, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but there was a flicker of something else. Gratitude. Those bikers had helped her, despite everything she had feared when they first approached. As she turned her key to head home, she noticed something on the passenger seat that hadn't been there before. A small patch, black with white stitching, folded neatly. It must have been left behind by one of the bikers when they were working on her car. She picked it up, examining the intricate embroidery. The design featured a winged skull and the words "Road Guardians" stitched beneath it. Her curiosity piqued. She made a mental note to look it up later, but for now, she needed to get home and let her husband know what had happened. As she merged back onto the road, her car's engine held steady, though she could feel it struggling with every mile. About 10 minutes from home, her phone buzzed with a faint signal. She immediately called her husband, Devin, recounting the ordeal in a breathless rush. "I thought it was going to end badly," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But they were so different from what I expected." Devin listened patiently, his tone calm and reassuring. "Sounds like you ran into some decent folks," he said. "Not everyone's out to hurt you, Bree. Sometimes, help comes from the places you least expect." His words stuck with her as she pulled into their driveway. The familiar sight of their modest one-story house brought her some comfort. She parked, turned off the engine, and sat in silence for a moment, staring at the patch in her hand. Devin greeted her at the door, his arms wrapping around her protectively. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. Brianna nodded, holding up the patch. "They left this behind. I don't know why, but it feels important." Devin took the patch, examining it closely. "Road Guardians," he read aloud. "Sounds like a biker group." "Maybe they're not what people think they are," Brianna sighed, leaning into him. "I was so scared at first. But they were kind. They didn't have to help me, but they did." Devin kissed the top of her head. "The world's full of surprises, Bree. Maybe this is a reminder not to judge people by how they look." She nodded, her mind still replaying the events of the evening. The bikers, the truck driver, the patch. It all felt like a strange, unexpected gift. As she stepped inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. Something about the Road Guardians lingered in her thoughts, a mystery she couldn't quite unravel. But for now, she was home, safe, and surrounded by the warmth of her husband's embrace. The world, she realized, was far more complicated and far more beautiful than she had ever imagined. "You're okay," Devin said softly, his arms still wrapped around her. "That's all that matters." Brianna nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the patch in her hand held a deeper meaning. "Devin," she said, pulling back slightly, "I think they were part of some group. They left this." She held up the patch, its intricate design catching the light. Devin took it, his brow furrowing as he examined it. "Road Guardians," he read aloud. "Sounds like a biker charity or something. Maybe they do this kind of thing often." Brianna's eyes widened. "A charity? You think they go around helping people?" "It wouldn't surprise me," Devin replied. "Some of those groups are about more than just riding. They've got codes, missions. They probably saw you needed help and stepped up." Brianna felt a swell of emotion, her earlier fears now replaced by a profound sense of respect. She decided to look them up, but before she could, there was a knock at the door. The sound was unexpected, and the person standing on their porch wasn't who they expected. The next twist would leave them speechless. Devin opened the door cautiously, his body slightly angled to shield Brianna from whoever was on the other side. Standing there, illuminated by the porch light, was one of the bikers, the lead one, the same man who had helped her on the bridge. He wasn't wearing his helmet now, and his rugged features were more human than intimidating. His eyes held a calm sincerity that immediately put Brianna on edge but also piqued her curiosity. "Evening," he said, his voice steady but low. "Sorry to bother you folks. I just wanted to make sure you made it home all right." Devin glanced back at Brianna, who had frozen in place just behind him. "She's fine," Devin said cautiously. "Thanks for helping her out back there." The man nodded, shifting his weight slightly. "Good. That's good to hear. I didn't want to leave without making sure. You never know what might happen. On that bridge!" Brianna finally stepped forward, the patch still in her hand. "You left this," she said, holding it out to him. He looked down at the patch, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That wasn't an accident," he said. "It's a little something we leave behind when we help someone, kind of our way of saying you're not alone." Brianna's fingers tightened around the fabric as she stared at him, her emotions a swirling mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's smile softened, and he took a step back, his hands resting on his hips. "Because the world's a tough place," he said. "And sometimes people need a reminder that there's still good out there. We're just doing our part." Brianna felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stopped." The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You'd have figured it out," he said, "but we were glad to help." He turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at her. "Take care of yourself, Brianna, and if you ever need help again, just look for the patch." With that, he walked back to his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life as he rode off into the night. Brianna stood there, the patch clutched tightly in her hand, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite name. Devin closed the door and turned to her, his expression a mix of relief and curiosity. "Well," he said, "that was unexpected." Brianna nodded, still staring at the patch. "They're not what I thought they were," she said softly. "They're different." Devin wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Maybe the world's not as black and white as we think," he said. "Sometimes the people we're quick to judge are the ones who surprise us the most." Brianna leaned into him, the weight of the day finally lifting. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never forget the road guardians or the kindness they had shown her on that lonely bridge. "Why go out of your way for someone you don't even know?" Brianna asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and disbelief. The man leaned against the doorframe, his gaze steady. "Because someone once did it for me," he said simply. "A long time ago, I was stranded on the side of the road, and a stranger stopped to help. He didn't have to, but he did. Told me, 'You pass it on when it's your turn.' So that's what I've been doing ever since." Brianna felt her chest tighten, her earlier fear giving way to an overwhelming sense of respect. She had spent so much time judging this man and his group by their appearance, assuming the worst. And yet here he was, standing on her porch, offering nothing but kindness. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice steadier. "Now, Eli," he said. "And if you ever find yourself in trouble again, you look us up, the Road Guardians. We're not too hard to find." Before they could say anything more, he gave a polite nod and turned to leave. Brianna watched as he climbed onto his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life before he rode off into the night. She stood there for a moment, the patch still in her hand, her mind racing with everything that had happened. Devin closed the door, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Looks like there's still good people out there," he said softly. Brianna nodded, her heart full as she looked at the patch one more time. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Sometimes they're not who you expect." The next day, Brianna couldn't stop thinking about what Eli had said. She looked up the Road Guardians and discovered they were, in fact, a national group dedicated to helping stranded motorists and supporting families in need. Their motto, "Ride to Protect," resonated deeply with her. She decided to share her story on a community forum, describing the kindness she had experienced and encouraging others to rethink their assumptions about people. The post quickly gained attention, with others sharing similar encounters with unexpected helpers. Sometimes, The lessons life teaches us come in the most unexpected ways, Brianna realized. The world wasn't as divided as it seemed, and kindness often came from places we least imagined. She vowed to carry that lesson forward and one day to pass it on when it was her turn.